Down the slippery slope we go. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe and let's briefly talk about today, which is, I don't know, first week of Donald Trump's calamitous presidency. Today was capped off by the Senate confirming Pete Hegseth as the defense secretary, and the vote was 50-50 with Vice President Vance tie-breaking and giving Pete Hegseth the Defense Department. How that will change morale and how that will change how the Defense Department works remains to be seen, but it is not encouraging to see that we now have a defense secretary who is not only not qualified and doesn't have the experience to be defense secretary, but is not also an alcoholic with a history of abuse of women, who has said that women have no combat role in the military, who is going to pretty much do anything that Donald Trump says. And he is now defense secretary. Mind you, the last 7 or 8 defense secretaries passed and got through nomination in super majority Senate votes. This one was 50-50. I believe that weakens our Defense Department. And as I've been saying over and over and over again, Donald Trump is dismantling our government from the inside. Whether that be by appointing unqualified people like Pete Hegseth, who squeak on by confirmation, where the Senate essentially relents its advice and consent power and lets one of the most unqualified people become the defense secretary, or whether you talk about how Donald Trump is going around conditioning disaster relief. So that's the second thing that makes me write to you and say that we are on a slippery slope downward and democracy is in crisis, because Donald Trump put on a show in Los Angeles where he argued with California politicians about disaster relief, and seemed to be conditioning disaster relief on how much water is allowed to come from North California to South, and on clearing the forest floor, when the Palisades fire was an urban fire and clearing the forest floor was not an issue. And the lack of water was also not an issue in this case. It was the problem with the pressure of the water coming up to certain parts of the Palisades, but it was quickly resolved. And then he went after every single thing that he could and have a disinformation campaign. But California politicians stood their ground and made it known that Donald Trump is effectively conditioning disaster relief on these demands that he's making that California must do before they get disaster aid. Now, then you have the slippery slope of freezes in the hiring, even in the VA, and in review of financial aid that is provided to other countries in the world, and freezing of that aid, and then you sort of spying out DEI hires, diversity hires in departments across the country in the federal government, and rooting them out and suspending them, and reviewing their whether they should have a job in the government or not. So this sort of a selective discriminatory movement, and then the war on transgender that keeps on going, because that will be discrimination on the basis of sex, and it's going to be challenged. Then there's the birthright citizenship that they're going to court on, and he's not going to win, whatever the argument may be, that he Donald Trump cannot, nor can Congress, take away birthright citizenship. The only way that that right goes away is by constitutional amendment, which is passage by 2/3 of both houses of Congress and then ratification of 3/4 of the states. And even if Donald Trump says that these undocumented immigrants are not under the jurisdiction of the United States, factually they are. They live in the United States, they've paid taxes in the United States, and therefore their children who were born in the United States have birthright citizenship in the United States, other than the blatant fact that they have a birth certificate from a hospital or legal medical institution that says that they're born in the United States. And then there's the talk of Donald Trump using the term invasion to sort of bypass enforcing the laws, the immigration laws, and using sweeping presidential powers that allows him to essentially do whatever he wants with immigrants and asylum seekers. That is going to be adjudicated in the courts. But we are in a place where the executive is going after Americans and American institutions. He's stalling them from the inside. He's culling the jobs of qualified people to put in loyalists, and Pete Hegseth being chief among them. And any faith in Senator Thune is now lost because he could have just been one more vote. And if he would have just said no to Pete Hegseth, he wouldn't be defense secretary right now. But John Thune is going to stand behind Donald Trump. So it's hard to tell how they're going to rule on Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel and RFK Jr., who all pose threats to the American populace and American government. RFK Jr. poses a threat to our health. Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard pose threats to our national security. And we have to see whether Senate relents their advise and consent power even in those scenarios and just lets Donald Trump have whoever Donald Trump wants so he can implement his authoritarian and fascist agenda. We are getting closer and closer to fascism and further away from democracy, despite this ironic place that we are in, where Donald Trump won the popular vote. So that is sort of a triumph of democracy, but the triumph of democracy cannot come at the demise of the rule of law. And that is what we're seeing at this time. And it is uncertain times, and it is unprecedented times. And what Donald Trump is doing is not normal. What is happening with his nominations is not normal. A 50-50 vote for the defense secretary when all the previous ones have had 85 plus votes in the Senate to be confirmed in their positions. It shows this split in our society that Donald Trump is exploiting. And it shows that we are not in a place that we can compare this administration and this president to any others. He's a convicted felon who has now pardoned violent criminals who are convicted felons, who will now do his bidding out on the streets and be his brown shirts, which I call the stand back and stand by rebellion, by pardoning his January 6th insurrectionist foot soldiers. So this episode is a reminder for you that we're going down a slippery slope, and we are on the way down to tyranny. If we don't pay attention and if we don't push back against these dangers to our country, to the rule of law, how our country operates from within, how we hire and fire qualified people in our government, then you are not understanding the damage that is being done. And by the time you grasp, it'll be too late. Donald Trump will have dismantled our administrative state and opened us up to adversarial actions by our enemies by compromising our Defense Department and our national security, and then go after our public health and what we eat and the water we drink. And that is a danger to the American public. Last thing, the price of eggs is skyrocketing. Donald Trump never, ever had the intention of bringing down the cost of living. He doesn't even want to talk about the economy anymore. With that said, thank you for listening, and let's keep talking. Please like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.